name is Naksik and I'm a moral philosopher, and if you watch the other videos you'll know what that means by now, and well done to you because I know it hasn't been easy. I know the topics are quite tough and it's really difficult to do philosophy like this without being able to interact with someone and ask your questions and follow your ideas, but it's the best we can do. Okay, so what we've done so far, we've talked about what is philosophy, what is morality, and then last week or last video we looked at a possible objection to the idea that we should be moral, and this is the idea that we should do what benefits ourselves. Why should I bother being moral? What's in it for me? If there's no reward for me, then there's no reason for me to be moral. And we looked at possible replies to this objection. We saw that this objection is sometimes underpinned by an empirical claim that all we can be is self-regarding, do what is best for us. We didn't really examine this because it's a matter for empirical inquiry, but even superficially we can see that it doesn't seem to be true. At times of a pandemic, you see loads of people who are out there putting their own lives at risk in order to benefit others, in hospitals and supermarkets and food production, in distribution and the post. None of these people hesitate to do something for which they don't get any benefit, and in fact they might get considerable harm. They expose themselves to quite a lot of risk of harm. But we didn't really look at the empirical argument because we're philosophers, and we looked at even the theoretical argument. Could the theoretical argument work even if we were to assume that naturally we tend to only look after ourselves? Could we derive the conclusion that we should only look after ourselves? Remember the difference between can and should. They're completely different little words. We change the argument here altogether. And we saw that even if we only looked at the should argument, we can't motivate it because there are some serious concerns with it. When we want to achieve something, we're not just interested in the benefit we get from that achievement, we're interested in the achieving itself. We're interested in being the person who actually managed to do that and not just pretending to be the person who managed to do that. The genuineness of the achievement is important to us. And we also saw that the kind of people that we are matters to us. So to say that I'm a good friend and to mean by that I take a lot of advantages and benefit myself because of the friendship is problematic. I'm just not being a friend. We would wonder whether that person had really understood what is involved in friendship, because it's the kind of relationship that's primarily about the friend, about benefit the friend. If you are in a friendship and you think there's a successful friendship because you're getting all the benefits, you're somehow missing the point of what it means to be a friend. So there seems to be an importance in the genuineness and the character of who we are and what we do that is not all about whether it benefits us, that we generally have a commitment to other people, and that this is part of how we understand a variety of values and relationships. Okay, that doesn't mean that there isn't a conflict. That doesn't mean that some things of the things that I do are not just for me, or that sometimes I find it difficult to do things for others because I would rather do things that benefit me. Of course that remains, and it's a question that needs to be resolved with respect to all sorts of different examples. But we're going to leave that to one side, and we're going to talk about another possible big objection to the idea of thinking about how you should behave, what kind of person you should be. And this is an idea that comes to a lot of people. I find that in most of my introductory seminars to morality, somebody will think about this and bring it up as an objection. And most people will find it to be quite a plausible objection the first time they look at it. It's a really, really interesting idea just for that. Most people will agree that it is true the first time they hear it or the first time they think about it. But usually at the end of the seminar, most people will see why it cannot be true, why there are really good objections to that claim. And even if you do think it's still a good idea at the end of the seminar, you'll hopefully understand why it needs quite a lot of defending. It cannot be accepted at its very basic level. So at the beginning it looks really plausible and everybody nods along and says, yeah, obviously. And at the end, almost everybody says, whoa, this doesn't work at all. what is the idea? The idea is this: isn't all morality relative? When you look around, you see that everybody has their own opinion. There is a lot of disagreement about morality. Absolutely everything that you can think of, you can imagine as someone who believes the complete opposite. You can look at historical examples. There's even cases where massive moral disagreements have fueled entire wars or entire countries or states exterminating large numbers of their population because they didn't agree with their version of morality. And even if you look out of your window at other different cultures, if you travel the world, or just, I don't know, open the internet and look at how other people live, you'll see that they have completely different ideas as to what you ought to morally do. Now, I want you to stop the video here and go away and think of examples of this. I want you to think of examples of things that are morally permitted, obligatory, or prohibited by some people, and the opposite by somebody else. So somebody thinks this is morally good and somebody thinks this is morally bad. Somebody thinks this is morally important and somebody else goes, nah, I'm not really interested in that at all. Your examples can be from other cultures, they can be from historical periods, from other societies, from other, whatever you like really. There's loads and loads and loads of examples. Go talk to your friends about it, see how big a list you should be able to come up with. I would imagine it will be quite long. Okay, back you come. I hope you had fun with that. Here are the ones I thought about. Adultery. There are cultures in which adultery is socially frowned upon. If you learned that your friend was adulterous, you might feel that she had done something wrong. You might counsel her not to do that again and to make amends. And there are cultures in which adultery is punishable by death. A much stronger prohibition against adultery and a much stronger idea of the immorality of adultery. Then again, there have been cultures where if you have a visitor at the end of a nice meal, it's only polite to offer them to have sex with your wife because it's part of the hospitality package. A completely different account of what is involved in having sex with people outside of marriage. What about punishment issued by the state? In some countries, capital punishment is the just punishment of people by the state for really grave crimes. It might even be considered as retribution. You take a life, then the state takes your life. In some countries, torture is a perfectly acceptable way of punishing criminals, whereas in other countries, there are very strict rules regarding what counts as non-cruel and unusual punishment. And you can only do things that are compatible with a conception of a person's human rights. You can't go beyond that. How about something more ordinary? In some countries, you can bathe in the nude. If you go to a sauna, you'll find men and women completely naked and completely relaxed about that. It is a normal part of going to a sauna. In other countries, everyone is quite modest. You're supposed to wear long sleeves, you're supposed to cover the top part of your chest. And yet in other countries, rules about aesthetic modesty apply only to women, and they apply to quite a different extent. Women are not supposed to show their hair or perhaps even their faces, but these rules don't apply to men. And a final one, in some countries dogs are pets. They're parts of the household, they're really important to us. In other countries, they're used for medical experiments in order to help human beings and advance science that will benefit human beings. And yet in other countries, dogs are just food and they get eaten along with other kinds of animals. So what is the moral status of dogs? Well, the answer is there is no answer. It just differs. It depends who you ask. You ask someone in a country where they like dogs and they have them as pets, they will tell you that dogs are morally important. You ask somebody in a country where they eat dogs and they'll tell you, well, dogs don't matter, they're just food for us. What is the answer here? Evidently, we can see that there is a lot of moral disagreement, so morality is relative. Morality changes from one person to the other. It is a matter of opinion, and from one society to the other. Okay, so that is the claim. There isn't anything else for philosophers to do because Anybody has their own opinion about what they think is moral or immoral about adultery, the type of punishment we should do, how many clothes we should wear in public, and the moral status of dogs, will make up their own mind and come up with their own answer to this question. And importantly, this answer is as valid as any other person's answer. Okay, so this is the question that my students ask me, and this is the question that we're going to answer. This is the idea that seems intuitively very plausible to most people who come across it. You generally find almost unanimously in seminars, the students think that this is a very, very plausible idea. Morality is relative. Okay, to understand what is being said here, we need to understand the question that we're going to ask. And this is going to be a really difficult question. We're going to ask a question about the nature of things, a metaphysical question, okay? If I ask you what time is it, you look at your watch and you'll tell me. If I ask you what kind of thing is time, we'll have a completely different type of discussion. You won't say 9 o'clock, oh no, sorry, 10 minutes past 9. You will say things like, could time be linear? Could time be the kind of thing that you can only move in one direction? Or could you go backwards in time? Is time the sort of thing that allows time travel? Okay, so we're asking a question about the nature of time. For our seminar today, we need to ask a question about the nature of truth and the nature of moral truth. That means that at the end, I won't be giving you answers like, what time is it? It's 9 o'clock. I won't be giving you moral truths. Adultery is immoral, or adultery is moral. We now know the answer. No. What I will be talking about is the equivalent of asking, is time linear? We're going to ask, what kind of thing is moral truth? Does it exist? Is it created or is it discovered? And is it relative to the individual? Okay, understanding the question is the most difficult thing of this topic. Let's look at it another way. I want you to think about the things you like eating. Hopefully there is something that you really dislike, or there is something you really like that nobody else likes. The spread Marmite is quite popular in the UK. It's a perfect example of this if you're familiar with it. It is a vile tasting thing that some people love, and in fact the whole marketing of this vile tasting paste is around the idea you either like it or love it. People who love this unique taste just really like it. But you could think of other things. I have a relative who doesn't like chocolate. I mean, who can believe that? Who can even survive without chocolate? But he doesn't like chocolate. Brussels sprouts. Some people like Brussels sprouts. Many people hate Brussels sprouts. I want you to go out there and talk to your friends. I want you to find some kind of food like Marmite or chocolate or Brussels sprouts that you intensely like and the other person intensely dislikes. And then I want you to use your new philosophical skills, which are all about arguing and persuading, to persuade that person to like this food, to like Brussels sprouts, which they had previously hated. Be careful, I don't want you to persuade the person to try Brussels sprouts. I want you to persuade them to like it, okay? Off you go. And back you come really quickly, I assume, because what I asked you to do is a bit cheeky. It should have appeared impossible to you, and that is because it is impossible. You can't get someone to like a food. You can get them to try again, and maybe it turns out their tastes have changed. They didn't like it before and they like it now. But if they continue not to like it, there is no amount of argument that will make Brussels sprouts likable to someone who doesn't like them. Why is that? Can you think for a moment and try to write down a sentence or two about why is it that you cannot make someone change a matter of taste, like whether they enjoy the taste of Brussels sprouts or not? The answer here is because matters of taste in this respect are relative to the individual. Whether you like Brussels sprouts or not doesn't go beyond a subjective opinion of what it feels like for you to experience Brussels sprouts in your mouth. If the experience is blech, it just remains blech. And there's no amount of talking that I can do or anybody else can do to change the blech into yum, that was lovely, or the other way around. What does that tell us about truth in terms of matters of taste, like whether we like Brussels sprouts or not? It tells us that truth here is relative and subjective. It is generated by the individual. If you've never experienced Brussels sprouts, you won't have an opinion on the truth of the matter. But as soon as you put them in your mouth, you'll be able to say, for me, blech, I don't like them at all. For me, yummy, I love them. And for the two people, even though they have a completely different opinion on Brussels sprouts, they're both equally correct because they're saying, for me, I like Brussels sprouts. I'm not saying you like Brussels sprouts. I have no clue what you think about Brussels sprouts until you tell me. But the truth of the matter about Brussels sprouts is generated by the individual, is relative by the individual. Okay. Let's think about truth in another domain. What is the truth of the matter in science? What is the truth of the matter about the shape of the Earth? Now, please don't tell me that sometimes people thought the Earth was flat, because hardly nobody did. There is a wonderful essay by Isaac Asimov on the subjectivity of science, where he explains exactly why Aristotle found out, through logic and reasoning, that the Earth cannot be flat. Almost nobody thinks that the Earth is flat, apart from the Flat Earth Society. Well, the world's a big place, there had to be someone, and a very small number of monks in the Middle Ages. Apart from that, everybody else could use observation to determine the shape of the Earth and conclude that it cannot be flat. It has to be something round-ish. I say round-ish because the exact shape of the Earth and measuring it is limited. Our ability to measure it is limited by whatever measurements we have available to us. Now, what is the truth of the matter about the shape of the Earth, and how does it compare to the truth of the matter about the likability of Brussels sprouts? Is the shape of the Earth generated by what I subjectively think about it? So is it round when I say it's round, but when you say it's flat, does it immediately become flat? Does it change depending on what I think it might be? No. In science, we look at what the objective truth of the matter is. The Earth does have a shape, and we're trying to discover it. Okay? We're not making it up as we go along. We're trying to discover something that is a fact. Now, you might say scientists get things wrong all the time. Of course they do, but this doesn't change the nature of scientific truth. Just because we are fallible, just because we make mistakes when we try to discover the truth about something, doesn't mean that the truth isn't out there. Okay? So the truth about scientific matters may be quite complex. And because we are fallible creatures, we may only get glimpses of this truth, we may misunderstand it or misrepresent it, and somebody else may come along who says, but look at this, and now we see things in a different way. But the truth of the matter is there. The truth is not generated by us. I don't go, blech, round Earth, I don't like it. I only like the flat Earth idea, yummy flat Earth idea. Therefore, the Earth is flat. It doesn't work that way. However much I may not like the fact that the Earth is round, it still remains round, which was not the case with Brussels sprouts. Me not liking Brussels sprouts made them non-likable for me. Okay? The truth about Brussels sprouts is relative. The truth about science is objective. It is determined by the facts. Okay. Brussels sprouts truth, shape of the earth truth, two different things. Question is, what kind of thing is moral truth? Is it like Brussels sprouts? Does it pop in and out of existence depending on your subjective views? Can I say bleh, adultery, and that makes it bad? And can I say yay, adultery, and that makes it good for somebody else? And both views are equally valid because the truth of the matter about morality is generated subjectively by me. So is morality like Brussels sprouts? Or is morality like science? Is there a fact of the matter and are we trying to discover it rather than make it up over there? Is morality objective or is it relative? Okay, you can see now that the relativist is here with the Brussels sprouts. He says there is no truth of the matter. To say I don't like adultery is to say I don't like Brussels sprouts. It expresses a completely personal opinion that came from my emotions or how I feel about adultery, in the same way that my views on Brussels sprouts came from how Brussels sprouts taste for me. And this view seems very plausible because we see a lot of disagreement around us. Okay. It isn't actually very plausible though, for a variety of reasons. Okay. The first one is that we try to persuade other people about the truth of our moral beliefs. When we are faced with someone who thinks that women should cover themselves from head to toe, should not work, should not own money, should not be educated, should not be able to make their own choices, but they should effectively be the property of their fathers and then their husbands, we want to say, you're wrong. Okay. And we want to say you're wrong for a variety of reasons. We want to ask them why they think what they think, and we want to put a pressure on the arguments that they give us. We give them counter-arguments, we give them replies, we try to change their minds. But if morality was relative like Brussels sprouts, there is no point in trying to change anybody's mind because their views on morality are just like their views on Brussels sprouts. How are you going to change somebody's mind about Brussels sprouts? You cannot. If they don't like them, they just don't like them. And if they think that this is the position of women subordinate to men, then this is what it is. Their thoughts on the matter generate the truth of the matter. Okay? Just because they feel this way, it means this is true. That means there's no point in rationally engaging with anybody else, in trying to get anyone to understand that they might be wrong, or that they need to change their opinions or modify their views, or exposing anybody to the reasons that they have for doing what they do and challenging those reasons. Equally, there's no point in anybody else finding out about your reasons. It's not going to help me to find out why you like Brussels sprouts. It's not going to make me like them. You can say they're juicy and greeny and remind me of, I don't know, they're disgusting. I can't think of anything even positive to say. But imagine you came up with some reasons. That's not going to change my mind. So there's no point in you sharing your reasons with anybody else. That means you can also never say that anybody's actually wrong, because they're not wrong. Do you remember there is no truth of the matter? Morality is relative. So you doing something and somebody doing the exact opposite are in the same standing as far as the truth of the matter goes. There isn't any. They're as good as each other. Now here you can think of the most objectionable thing that you could possibly ever think of, and you're going to have to accept that the person who believes that is as right as you are. Yeah. When you say women should have the right to vote, and be educated and hold down jobs and be autonomous people with full political rights, and somebody says women should be slaves to men, these two ideas have the same standing. This isn't better or more right than this one because there is no right and wrong. And most of us balk at that. Most of us want to say that there are some things that are very wrong. Think of massive historical examples, genocides of the innocent, simply because they had a different skin colour or a different religion or a different political affiliation or a different sexual preference than somebody else. You would have to say that all these things are as right and as correct as your views, because there is no right and wrong. It is all entirely relative and generated by the individual. Almost nobody wants to like that one. Okay, you have to be a very committed relativist to be willing to live with that. There are some things we want to say are just wrong, even if there's a small number of them. The needless and unreasonable murder of innocents just because you fancy doing it. If you are a relativist, you have to accept that this can be as valid a position for someone who wants to do it and who thinks that this is the right thing as its complete opposite. If you are a relativist, you also have a problem with education. You can't be saying to your kids, be kind, because be unkind is as good as be kind, or don't hit, or share that nice red truck. Because the opposite, hitting, biting, using the truck to clobber people over the head with, is as valid as what you think. Your toddler's ideas on what she should be doing are as valid as yours, because the truth of the matter is generated by the individual and is subjective. Just like a toddler can say, Brussels sprouts, I love them, when you say blech, your toddler can say, hitting you over the head with a truck, great idea, when you say no. Okay. One of the things that motivate people to be relativist is the liberal idea that they ought to be tolerant. Now, if you see that other cultures are different, who are you to say that yours is best? And other cultures have got it wrong and have to do what you're saying. Most people think that tolerance is a value. Hold on though, if you're really a relativist, imagine the claim, tolerance is a good thing. There's something you believe to be true. There are loads of people who are intolerant. There are loads of people who think that anybody who disagrees with them should be imprisoned, tortured, killed, made to change their mind until they agree with them. And intolerance is a good thing, the complete opposite from you. If you're a relativist, you have nothing to say to that. If you're a relativist, you don't have any power to motivate the idea that we should all be tolerant. There is nothing we should all. Everybody makes it up as they go along for themselves. And intolerance is as much a subjective expression of what you feel about morality as tolerance is a subjective expression of what somebody else feels about morality. You go ahead with tolerance, somebody else will go ahead with intolerance. So paradoxically, if you're a relativist, you have a problem with tolerance, which is also something that most people would like to hang on to. So if moral truth is entirely relative and entirely subjective, you're going to have a problem with disagreements, because there's no point in disagreeing about anything. Everybody has their own tastes. De gustibus non disputantes. Tastes are not to be disputed. Therefore, morality is not to be disputed. The slaughter of people who you think are innocent is not for you to dispute. You can never say that anybody else has gotten it wrong. There can't be any historical example of immoral action, because that doesn't make any sense. It's not immoral, it's just different. It's generated by a person who has different feelings about this than you. There is no point to education. There is no point in trying to pass your values on to your children, because they'll make up their own minds, and all of it, morality, is constructed by the individual. There's no point in trying to convince anybody else, because your arguments don't have any power. There is no truth of the matter to be discovered, therefore there is no point in the discussion. The truth is made up by how you feel about it. Okay, this is why most people start off being relativists and then get a little bit surprised at where this takes them. The thought that morality is relative brings you here to quite unpalatable conclusions. There are philosophers who are relativists. They're much more sophisticated than the very simple idea we started from, and they try to account for some of these grave difficulties that relativism has. There are also many philosophers who are objectivists exactly because of the problems that relativism raises. Because most people want to say that some things are wrong, that there are some fundamental, inalienable things. This is the kind of thought that generates human rights. The idea that there are some things that cannot be violated in principle, even though there are countries and dictators and torturers who violate these rights. We still want to say they shouldn't. They were wrong to do this. So we like hanging on to this idea. And we also value the idea that we can discover the truth through reasoning and argument and persuasion. Okay, one final objection. You might say, well, if the truth is there to be discovered, how come there is so much disagreement? Well, because the truth is difficult to find. Just because something is out there, just because moral truth is the type of thing that exists, doesn't mean that it's easy to see what it is. It doesn't mean that you just open your eyes and you have an epiphany and you suddenly know the answer to all moral questions that have ever arisen in the history of humanity. It can still be a difficult thing to discover, and that's why we must proceed with caution. There is a reason to be tolerant of other people's attitudes, not necessarily because they're right, but because we don't know as yet. And maybe the process of figuring out the truth of the matter benefits from many voices. It's good for my arguments to be challenged. I might figure out what's wrong with them, how they need to be modified, how they need to be strengthened, which bits should be abandoned. So this process of thinking about why something is the case and defending our views is fundamental to discovering a really difficult truth. The discussion itself, the disagreement itself, is part of the process. But it doesn't mean that there isn't an answer there to be found. And you can see this with science as well. Scientists have massive disagreements. They have new ideas and new theories that completely revolutionize everything that went before. But nobody concludes from that there is no truth of the matter, that it's all being made up, that unicorns are as valid a scientific hypothesis as dinosaurs. No, what they conclude from it is to be cautious, to discuss your ideas with others, to search into yourself for your reasons, to expose everything to scrutiny, because while the truth is out there, it is difficult to discover. Okay, I think we'll leave it there. I know this was quite a difficult one, but sometimes it's worth doing things that challenge you a little bit. I used to have a PhD supervisor who was very intense. Well, he's still very intense. My goodness, I've just killed him off. He is very much alive and very much active in philosophy. He's a very intense thinker. Everything you say, he challenges it. And he exposes even the tiniest little detail to intellectual scrutiny. And I used to have these supervisions with him where every word was examined, and not to mention every argument or every idea. Whenever I left the supervision, I used to think that my brain was floating above my head because he had worked so hard. I had kind of left my body and said, I've had enough. I don't really want to know you anymore and what you're doing to me. I just need a break. This session may have felt a little bit like that to you. This is a really, really difficult idea whether morality is relative or objective, but it's also a really important one. It's important for you to understand why the very first expression of this idea is appealing but quite wrong. And if you are going to hold on to the idea that morality is relative, there are quite a few objections that you need to deal with. Or you can become an objectivist like the rest of us. Good. Okay, we'll stop there and I'll see you next time. I think what we'll do next is probably look at 3 normative theories, 3 accounts of what is morality and what is the right thing to do. Consequentialism, deontology, and virtue ethics. So we'll do 3 videos on those 3 ideas. Bye bye.